Centre, Ivana Bacik.
You're very welcome to the House, Minister, as always. And others have spoken of your reform record. I just wanted also to pay tribute to, particularly of your work on pluralism in the primary sector in terms of patronage of schools, which I've been directly involved with you on that. And I really think you've made such a huge step forward in terms of progress for what parents want to see, which is greater diversity of choice in the schools that are available for their children. So thank you for that. And also, of course, for the other work you've done on literacy. And I know there's a big launch of the Right to Read campaign later this week with Deputy O'Riordan, and reforms of the junior cert, which again I think are very child-centred, and others have spoken also of reforms of Susie and so on. But I think also in this House we'd particularly like to thank you for your willingness to initiate legislation in this House. And again, this bill is one of those pieces of legislation that's being initiated in this House, and we really do, I think, appreciate that. And it's great to get bills like this first in the Seanad, particularly when they pertain to something to do with higher education, about which a number of us would have a particular interest, clearly. I do agree with Senator Donovan in terms of the timing. It was unfortunate, I think, that it was only published so recently on Thursday night. We did get it on Thursday afternoon in the order, in the schedule that was sent around to everyone. Senator Moran and myself did check that, Senator. But certainly, and there is always this issue in July in terms of legislation being rushed in. But it is, I think, it's not ideal to have such a short time lag between the publication of a bill and its introduction in the House. Turning to the bill itself, as others have said, it really has one primary purpose and then two other issues in it as well. The primary purpose being, of course, this provision for a very restrictive recognition or restrictive authorisation to describe a provider of education as a university outside the state for specified purposes. And Senator Barrett and I did have a brief conversation about whether a simple amendment to the Universities Act would have sufficed if it were wished, for example, just to include one institution like the Royal College of Surgeons. But I think on reading Section 2 carefully that it is a much more limited idea of university recognition. Indeed, it's not university recognition. In fact, it's authorisation to be described as a university outside the state for specified purposes. And further in Section 2, of course, it says that an education provider granted an authorisation under the section shall not describe itself as a university otherwise than for a specified purpose outside the state. And I think both Senator Barrett and I would approve entirely of that very restrictive approach, that more limited authorisation. And we do all appreciate, as Senator Moran and others have said, the need to ensure to encourage more international students to study here, as the programme for government has said. And indeed, we recognise the huge benefit, not just economic, but also cultural and social, that internationalisation of our education system does provide us with. And since others have mentioned the Royal College of Surgeons, that institution has a strong tradition of educating international students and has made an immense contribution to the Irish healthcare system. And indeed, on a day when we've seen a lot of publicity, or in recent days, about the difficulty in recruiting doctors into our health service, it's important that we are offering quality medical education programmes, and Surgeons does that. There are concerns about its links, in particular with the regime in Bahrain, and others again have commented about that. But it is already a recognised college of the NUI, and it's clear that given the very tightly drawn restrictive criteria for eligibility, that there will be I think that there are safeguards in place to ensure that the title of university, even in this limited sense, will not be overused. And I know there is another issue about this, which is a broader one, which some of Irish universities have raised, which is a concern about the devaluing of the status of university. But I think that is covered by the very tightly drafted provisions in sections 2 to 5 in particular. I did also want to mention, finally, Minister, the issue of the school league tables, and I entirely agree with you about the need to really guard against the publication of crude school league tables. We've seen in other jurisdictions that this can lead to unfair jockeying for position among parents, that it sets up essentially a false competition, because, of course, as Senator Moran has said, academic results are not the only measure of success of a school, and schools will have different demographics in terms of their pupils who come to them for eligibility, and it's also hugely important that schools would have diversity in their enrolment. And I know, again, one of the many reforms you have brought in is to ensure that we have fairer enrolment policies in our schools, and I think that publication of school league tables really militates against that sort of fair enrolment policy, and it creates, I think, really unfair competition and puts huge pressure on parents. And indeed on schools, of course. So just to finish, Minister, just to say to support the bill, and again to commend you on your great reforming work in the education sector.